Hi, I'm Steve Clemons, and I have a question. President Trump says he's made the U.S. bigger, better, richer, and stronger than ever before. But do most Americans agree? Let's get to the bottom line. Last week, President Donald Trump gave his annual speech to the U.S. Congress, known as the State of the Union Address. Strip away all the hyperbole and attacks on his political enemies, i.e. the Democrats, and you basically have his vision for America. That vision calls for more crackdowns on immigration, crime, and diversity, equity, and inclusion inside the country, and dealing with wars and chaos all over the world. On the economy, Trump says it's roaring, which it may be, but at the macro level. But is his message easing the concerns of tens of millions of Americans who live in financial fear, the fear of losing a job in a tight labor market, and the fears of how to afford housing, health care, food, cars, college tuition, childcare, and so much more, while all that gets much more expensive? Today, we're talking with Brian Tyler Cohen, host of the No Lie with BTC podcast, covering American politics, and also Matt Duss, Executive Vice President of the Center for International Policy, who also hosts his own podcast, the Undiplomatic Podcast, covering all sorts of geopolitics. Gentlemen, it's great to have you both here.
Thanks, Steve.
Look, 1 hour and 47-minute State of the Union address, longest State of the Union address by a U.S. President and Congress ever in history. So President Trump, gets another mark in the history books. He said that he's made America bigger, better, richer, and stronger than ever before. Brian, your thoughts and reactions?
I think he's falling into the same trap that helped push him into the presidency in 2024. I mean, we saw the extent to which this idea of Democrats going forward and telling Americans that everything was fine, everything's fine economically, the stock market is doing great, median wages are going up, like all of these macroeconomic metrics that they could point to were somehow evidence that everybody was completely fine in this country, when we know now in retrospect that that wasn't the case. But telling people that they are experiencing an economic reality that doesn't comport with their actual reality proved to be a disastrous strategy in 2024. And now Trump is looking at that, even though he was the beneficiary of that, and basically replicating the exact same thing. So do I think that was a good idea? No. And in fact, I think that is going to have consequences not just for him, but for all of the Republicans on the campaign trail that now have to decide, okay, I'm going to either embrace Donald Trump so that I don't, be on the receiving end of some mean tweet, or I can distance myself from him and risk being on the receiving end of some mean tweet. And so he's put them between a rock and a hard place just in time for midterms.
Well, let me ask you about kitchen table economics. The president basically said we're in this massive deflationary period, without using those words. Prices are plummeting of food. Brian, your reactions to that?
I mean, they're not. It's a bald-faced lie. We have seen the prices of virtually all goods as the result of this trade war go up, this misguided trade war that everybody knew would serve as a consumption tax on Americans. That means that prices of food, of clothing, of electronics, of toys, whatever it may be, those prices have all risen. We've seen utility bills go up. We've seen, as the result of the One Big Beautiful Bill, food assistance get cut to the tune of $186 billion. That was supposed to make food more affordable in this country. We saw Medicaid get gutted from 17 million Americans. That's supposed to make health care affordable in this country. We just saw the ACA subsidies that helped 24 million Americans afford their health care. That get gutted. And so on issue after issue, whether it's consumer goods, whether it's health care, whether it's food assistance, we have watched Donald Trump almost unilaterally be responsible for the fact that these prices have risen. And so, which would be bad enough unto itself. But then him going forward and gaslighting people into thinking that what is their economic reality is somehow not true, again, is just going to have major adverse impacts on an electorate that knows better, because they can see their bills. They can see their grocery bills, their utility bills, their medical bills, and they can tell that he is perfectly content to lie to them.
Matt, one of the other giant earthquakes that happened this year, or just really right before the State of the Union address, was a Supreme Court decision basically saying that most of Donald Trump's tariffs were illegal. I'd love to get your sense of where that stands right now, and how, when you're out there talking to Americans and you're looking at that part of the international system, right, how does that get resolved?
Right. I mean, let's understand the way he's using tariffs. He's not using them really to balance trade. He's using them as yet another form of sanction. He's been imposing these tariffs as a tool of punishment and a tool to extract tribute. And when he receives the appropriate tribute or the appropriate change of behavior from the targeted country, he's willing to kind of reduce or remove the tariff. Now, that's not
so what you're saying is very important. That it's not really about the underlying U.S. economy.
It's not, and
it's about tribute.
It really is. I mean, that explains his approach to, I think, foreign policy generally. I do think there is an important step we've taken. I think the Biden administration took this too. They kept on most of Trump's tariffs that Trump had imposed in the first term. This is a move away from the old neoliberal kind of trade and economic order, which had this kind of religious belief that tariffs are taboo. Anything that imposes restrictions on free trade is unacceptable. And fortunately, we now realize, much too late, but we now realize that that's not quite true. Tariffs are a tool, but the question is how and for what purpose are you using them? And again, Trump is using it, I think, for this very specific purpose.
Matt, one of the other moments in the State of the Union that I was surprised by was his talking about corruption and talking about insider stock trading and the efforts to stop that insider stock trading and to come out. Is his talking about corruption real, authentic, or distraction?
I mean, I think it's completely a distraction, but it's smart. I mean, before I get into that, I do just want to very quickly agree that we don't need to do the State of the Union. This meeting could be an email. That is my major takeaway from the State of the Union last night. But yes, you're right. Elizabeth
Get an hour and 47 minutes of our lives back.
Oh, my God, we'll never get that time back. But yes, I mean, this has been Senator Warren's position. There's been a lot of Democrats, progressive, anti-corruption Democrats, stop stock trading by members of Congress and their spouses. It was very smart for Trump to adopt that. Again, he felt that affordability had taken from him. It would be a bad thing if this issue were taken away from Democrats. It's a very powerful issue. Very smart of him. He understands. I mean, he does have a level of political intelligence. I mean, his whole argument has been drain the swamp. The system is rigged. Now, obviously, it is rigged on behalf of people like Donald Trump and his friends. But the reason that message gets traction is because the system is rigged. People understand that. So again, it's going to be very interesting to see the way he actually goes about, the Trump anti-corruption fight. Clearly, there are certain things that he would rather focus on and things that he would very much not rather focus on. We saw this with the really gross attacks on the Somali community. Some level of corruption and malfeasance, which is of course being investigated as it should be. But the amount of attention that he put on this community compared to how much money he and his family are just stealing hand over fist is, of course, absolutely absurd and offensive.
Well, Brian,
and if I could add to that,
please, go ahead.
that as well, and I agree with everything that Matt said, and I would also add, the irony is not lost on me, nor should it be lost on anybody, that of Trump's roughly 100 pardons, half of them were for people who committed fraud themselves.
That's right.
And he canceled out restitution that would have given back to the American people and the U.S. government over $1 billion.
Right.
So for him to stand up there and talk about corruption is almost contemptuous of the American people.
Right.
But I think to Matt's point, he is smart to try and own this frame, but he's done it before, and I think the way in which he's able to convince people is probably losing steam, because he ran as a populist both times, and he claimed that he was going to pass an infrastructure law that never materialized, a middle-class tax cut that never materialized, a health care plan that was more comprehensive and yet more affordable that never materialized, a jobs boom that never materialized, a manufacturing renaissance that never materialized. All he did in his first term was pass a tax cut that disproportionately favored millionaires and billionaires. And then he did it again in this term, where he claims that he cares about the cost of rent and the cost of housing and the cost of groceries and the cost of eggs. He went so granular to talk about the cost of an egg. And what does he do when he's in office? Well, he busies himself with yet another tax cut and then building a $400 million ballroom for himself and retrofitting a Qatari jet to the tune of $1 billion that taxpayers have to pay for, and he gets to keep the jet, and repaving the Rose Garden. And so I don't know how much more mileage he can get out of this idea that he's a populist when we now have 2 terms under our belt watching this guy say one thing and yet deliver for only himself.
But I think broadly the question is, Brian, what I've been amazed by is the incoherence, in my view, of the Democratic response to what we saw and what Americans are feeling, what you're talking about. I don't know what Democrats stand for. Are they just going to run and be, well, we're at least not Donald Trump as the way to perhaps coming back in the majority in the House and, coming to midterm elections? Or do you think there's a coherent agenda that I haven't yet, tuned into that's going to be in play?
I think the previous election cycle, this off-year election cycle, is going to be somewhat instructive because you have people like Mamdani on the left and then more centrist candidates like Mikey Sherrill and Abigail Spanberger, who all kind of coalesced around this strategy of focusing on people on the ground, meet them where they are, and making sure their life is affordable. And so I don't necessarily think that you need some broad consensus, which, by the way, is never going to happen in the Democratic Party. It is not as homogenous as the Republican Party is ever going to be. It certainly doesn't follow the same, like the Republican Party has one underlying principle, and that is whatever Donald Trump says is our value system now. Democrats are never going to be like that, and so it's inherently more difficult to get Democrats to coalesce behind any idea.
Let me ask you, let's go into foreign policy for a minute. Apparently, there's an autopsy report being developed by the Democratic National Committee that looks at the Gaza crisis, the reactions to it, the way Kamala Harris and Joe Biden had been positioned as one of the key factors in why they lost the race. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, my understanding is that report has already been developed. It already exists. They don't want to release it.
So they're hiding it.
They're hiding it.
Yeah.
I think that's what's happening. People who have looked at it, people have heard from people inside the DNC. This was reported over this past week. The people inside the DNC have acknowledged, and this doesn't surprise me because I've heard the same thing from people close to the Harris campaign. And in the Harris campaign is their own internal information, their own internal polling showed that this was hurting her. Unfortunately, the party establishment did not want to get crosswise with some conservative donors. They believed quite wrongly that they would lose more than they could win if she shifted on Gaza. We all know what happened. But as you say, your point is a good one. Donald Trump was able to get a ceasefire. It's a clearly imperfect ceasefire. The Palestinian civilians continue to be killed, continue to suffer in a very acute humanitarian crisis, but has gotten slightly better. I think. But at the same time, what we see in this Board of Peace, Donald Trump's whole approach has been essentially to sideline the UN, to take control of this process to a degree that I think even concerns Benjamin Netanyahu. But still, the question is, does this lead to real stability and real peace? And the bottom line, as you know, is until the Palestinians actually have self-determination, liberation, self-governance, we're not going to get to a durable peace. And the bottom line is Netanyahu and his government refuses to countenance the idea of real Palestinian self-government. So that means, unfortunately, we will very likely be back to more rounds of violence.
Brian, you're the most famous YouTuber I know in talking constantly about the news to progressive youth and more. And you're out there wrestling with people in different views, but you're basically a huge force among young people who are looking at this. And so that's why this issue of this, not yet released, perhaps hidden report is interesting to me. And what is the vibe? What is the energy over the Gaza issue? Not only in terms of what Joe Biden didn't do, but also, no matter where you are with Donald Trump, it's not the same. He has moved. Sometimes he swims with Netanyahu, sometimes he knocks Netanyahu in the head. So what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think what Matt said is absolutely correct. And on this idea of the autopsy, this has actually been a recurring theme for the Democratic Party, a recurring problem for the Democratic Party, this idea that there are undemocratic tendencies within the party, and that stems all the way back from Hillary and Bernie in 2016, but still rears its head and also the superdelegate issue, but it rears its head today, where we need to be able to have these discussions and these arguments without feeling like these things are preordained for us. And when something like the autopsy isn't released, then it only kind of reinforces this idea that the party is still acting in a way that's completely untethered to how the vast majority of Democrats actually feel. And we've watched as cover-ups have become worse than the crime that they're supposed to hide. We're seeing it right now with the Epstein files. And so Democrats need to learn their lesson in terms of the dangers of hiding this stuff as opposed to, using this opportunity now where there's no election. We're still almost a year away from midterms. And so if not using this moment right now to figure out some of these internal problems, then when? I mean, this is when we should have some exposure onto this stuff. This is when we should have some transparency onto this stuff, and the process should be democratic so that we can, not feel like there is some invisible hand guiding everything, and that we're just, rubes coming along, getting strung along for the ride.
Another feature of the State of the Union address always is, what do they not talk about? What do they not mention? When you have a hockey team, the U.S. hockey team, huge ovations, what's not happening? And, one of the things that didn't happen is no discussion of the Epstein files. You had the son of the Queen of England arrested. You had Peter Mandelson, the former High Commissioner for Trade of Europe and former British ambassador to the United States, arrested over this. I'm just interested when it comes to things like that. That's one element. Another is the killing of 2 U.S. citizens by ICE and all of the issues that were happening and unfolding in Minneapolis with a very, very aggressive, ICE enforcement, if you will, or the harassment and detention of, alleged non-citizens, et cetera, for migration violations, et cetera. But when you kind of look at that and these things that were not talked about, are they still on the American radar screen? Are Americans still angry about them? Are they still curious about those? Or is the president succeeding in a national distraction?
No, I would say he's not succeeding. I mean, I think you can tell from what we've heard from him and from his administration that they are very concerned that this Epstein issue will not go away. With regard to the 2 Americans killed by ICE in Minnesota, not surprising he didn't talk about it. Yes, Americans are still generally supportive of deporting illegal immigrants, but I think Americans are also very against Trump on this, the way he has been carrying out this policy. Even pro-Trump Americans, they don't want their neighborhoods invaded by guys in military gear. This is not the country that they want to live in. So I think it was no one should be surprised that Trump wanted to focus on the crimes and violence carried out by illegal immigrants, although some people he called out for these crimes were not in fact illegal immigrants. You would expect a president to at least acknowledge the murder of 2 Americans, but of course he is not a normal president.
Brian, and I would add, Steve, if I can jump in on what Matt just said. I think it's also really instructive to listen to what Trump didn't say, because the fact that Trump, in his ideal scenario, I mean, he's got nobody rebutting him, at least not in real time. He has the stage. This is the biggest speech he's going to be able to give between now and midterms, and so this was, him on his best terms. He didn't say a word about ICE. He did mention DHS, but he didn't utter the word ICE. And he didn't utter anything about the Epstein files. I frankly would have been floored if he did mention the Epstein files. But I think that is real. And even affordability was just a fleeting mention. I think he spent all of 3 minutes on it in an hour and 47-minute speech. And so you can learn a lot by what he doesn't say, by the issues that he thinks are going to be too toxic for him. I can say from doing my own content online, the Epstein issue and the ICE issue both have enormous potency online. If I post a video about the Epstein files or some update in the investigation, it will attract more viewers than virtually any topic. And so anecdotal though it may be, I absolutely not just think, but know that these 2 issues, Epstein and ICE, are still have an enormous degree of potency. The fact that I can use that information, plus the fact that Trump doesn't want anything to do with them, is really instructive in terms of kind of getting a blueprint on what Democrats should focus on based on what Trump is avoiding.
I'm also interested, I want to get your quick reactions on what I thought, Matt, you cover so much in, U.S. foreign policy, why there was so little foreign policy in it. I mean, he's muscling up in the Gulf, going to do something one way or another with Iran. Did mention a little bit about the Board of Peace and some tiny bit about Hamas. Very, very little broadly about foreign policy. And so we've got Iran out there. Also, China wasn't mentioned at all, not even mentioned. First time I can remember China not being a boogeyman in the State of the Union address for something. Did that surprise you and you think, what's that about?
I mean, the tiny amount actually did. I mean, let's be real. I mean, foreign policy nerds like us are disappointed every year at how little there is. But even in those terms, especially when you understand that the United States has deployed the biggest military force to the Middle East that we have had there in over 2 decades. I mean, so since, the lead up to the Iraq War, we have not had this much firepower in that region. even when you consider what might happen, the fact that we have thousands and thousands of American servicemen and women there doing this, it at the very least, the American people deserve some explanation of what the president's plan were. And they didn't get that. They just got a few sentences about Iran has to commit. They have to say the magic words that they won't get a nuclear weapon, which, by the way, they have said repeatedly. The Iranian foreign minister clarified that exact point literally hours before the speech. So again, it's all pretty nonsensical here.
Brian, your thoughts on the absence of major foreign policy hoopla in this speech?
Yeah, I think that oftentimes he uses these foreign policy issues just as a way to distract from domestic issues. To Matt's point, I don't think that there's any coherent strategy behind any of this. I mean, him saying 5 minutes ago that we decimated Iran's nuclear capabilities, but now we may have to strike again so that we can decimate Iran's nuclear capabilities shows that there's no coherent through line in any of this. I truly do believe that this is just a way for him to throw something, throw some spaghetti at the wall so that people aren't paying attention to some of these domestic issues that are weighing him down, whether it's ICE, whether it's a lack of affordability, or whether it's the Epstein files. And, this isn't the first time that presidents will use foreign affairs or the issue of potential war to distract Americans from something that's happening at home that reflects poorly onto them. But I think it's especially nonsensical given the fact that he himself ran on an America First agenda, which makes it even more apparent that he's just using these issues as some way to distract from when things aren't going well here at home.
And no mention of Greenland. Is Greenland safe now?
Right. No. I mean, Greenland will never be safe.
Greenland will never be safe.
Just,
Matt Duss.
While Trump's in office, I don't know.
Yeah.
But I think, that's right. He does use these as a distraction, but I think that is part of why I was so surprised at how little he talked about it. This is an area where presidents enjoy enormous authority. He clearly believes, I think it's been reported that he believes that the Iran operation last summer and the Venezuela operation were huge successes. And I think we have to admit tactically, I think they were very impressive. My view is they will have a very long tail that is very bad for the country and for the region. But he believes that it was an enormous success. So I got to say I was a bit surprised that he didn't spend more time kind of beating his chest and telling everybody how awesome he is.
One of the funniest parts of the State of the Union address for me was when he awarded some true heroes some Congressional Medals of Honor, Purple Heart, pointed out people that I think without any controversy were real heroes in the country for things that they did. Mm-hmm. But I think the slight move to say, well, if I could give myself the Congressional Medal of Honor or change the rules and laws to do it, I would want to do that, and I would be with you guys to give it to himself. And also talking about Trump accounts and sort of these are baby accounts, sort of saying, and I didn't name them. I didn't. Me as Donald Trump didn't name them.
People begged me to do this.
But begged me to do this and to put the Donald Trump name. Any final thought, Brian?
I think to that point, Trump is the hero of his own story, and he is just everything he does right now is to try and bolster his legacy. And so if he can create these Trump accounts, he will. If he can get airports named after him, he will. He is so desperate to make himself the center of attention, and it's clear that he's compensating for his lack of governance. And so, look, if he was in a position where I think he was holding true to his own promises, he wouldn't need to do all of that stuff. He wouldn't need to compensate by naming things after him and trying to get his face plastered on Mount Rushmore or whatever he's going to try to do this week. But he can't. And frankly, that's why we're seeing all of these desperate attempts by Donald Trump to lift himself up and heap praise onto him because he knows that at the end of the day, he is doing it because he's compensating for his lack of success in office. Well,
we'll have to leave it there, but it's always good to remember that half the country feels very strongly that this is the right time, the right guy, the right message. It was great to hear some different views here today. But I want to thank you both. YouTuber Brian Tyler Cohen, host of No Lie with BTC, and Matt Duss at the Center for International Policy. Really appreciate you joining us today.
Thanks, Steve.
Thanks, Steve.
Thanks, Brian.
So what's the bottom line? State of the Union addresses are important because they show us what presidents want Americans to believe. For Trump, that includes promises that he's fighting to bring prices down for Americans and make their cities safer. Some of this has shades of truth in it, but the rest doesn't align with the realities that many Americans are feeling and living. He's muscled up U.S. military presence in the Gulf, and no one knows when or if he'll declare a new war on Iran. And no one knows if his board of peace and the billions committed to rebuilding Gaza are an illusion or are a real thing. Illusions, shadows, and occasional nuggets of truth. It's not just a Republican thing or a Democratic thing. In politics, it's just business as usual. And that's the bottom line.